it. Let me maybe get some free up some space here. All right, let's go. Well, America and Jacobin viewers at home, the presidential election is right around the corner. The world's oldest democracy will engage in its quadrennial ritual in which we pick our next president, the leader of the free world. Can't escape it. You got to talk about it. And just days out, here's a surprising stat. Donald Trump is actually doing better with voters of color than he did in 2016. What? Record scratch. After 4 years in power, Trump is actually improving his standings with minorities. I mean, you may be saying to yourself, Nando, I've been obsessively following the discourse, refreshing Twitter every 2 seconds for 4 years. Trump is a blatant racist and homophobe, and xenophobe, probably homophobe, xenophobe, and he hates people of color. It can't possibly be true that he's actually doing better with blacks and Latinos. Well, it's true. Just take a look at this headline at 538. Trump is losing ground with white voters, but gaining among black and Hispanic Americans. So the discourse is upside down. And if you dig into the details, it gets even more confounding. Democratic nominee Joe Biden is attracting more support than Hillary Clinton did among white voters as a whole, especially white women, older white voters, and those without a 4-year college degree, which has helped him build a substantial lead of around 10 points, according to 538's national polling average. However, Trump is performing slightly better than last time among college-educated white voters, and he has gained among voters of color, especially Hispanic voters and younger black voters. So white working class voters, who everyone was obsessed with and everyone credited with delivering the election to Trump in 2016, are abandoning him big time. According to 538, Trump beat Hillary Clinton amongst white voters without a college degree by 25 points. His current lead with white voters without a college degree, 12 points. But the weird thing is that Trump is also doing better with voters of color, especially younger black voters, and crucially, Latino men.
And Torres is part of about or just over a quarter of Latinos who are strongly or somewhat in support of this president. Michelle Mayorga, a New Mexico-based pollster, says the backbone of the support comes from men.
Hispanic men in particular are a swing vote. They're a vote that we have to go and get.
And while Democrats will likely win the majority of Latino votes overall, the margins are narrower with men. A New York Times Siena College poll found the Vice President Joe Biden leads by 34 percentage points among Latina voters. But with Latino men, his lead is just 8 points.
So Biden only has an 8-point lead amongst Latino men, which I think would surprise most people. Now, for decades, Democratic strategists have been dreaming of the permanent demographic majority for their coalition. Back in 2002, Rui Teixeira and John Judas wrote a book called The Emerging Democratic Majority. In it, they argued that in the wake of George McGovern's historic defeat in 1972, the Democratic Party was putting together an alliance of minorities, working and single women, the college-educated and skilled professionals that would simply outnumber the Republican coalition for good. They called this phenomenon George McGovern's revenge. And on the heels of Barack Obama's comfortable re-election win in 2012, which came on the 10th anniversary of the release of that book, Teixeira and Judas gloated in The Atlantic. We are now 10 years farther down this road, and McGovern's revenge only seems sweeter. Barack Obama has just been re-elected, the first Democratic president since Franklin Roosevelt to win successive elections with more than 50% of the vote, powered by the continuing rise of the coalition described in the book. In the face of considerable economic adversity, Obama won 332 electoral college votes, 9 out of the 10 most hotly contested swing states, and a second term with a coalition that was stunningly diverse. They continued, it would be hard to imagine a better 10th anniversary present for the emerging Democratic majority, but will this new coalition be able to hold together over the long term? Well, that depends on whether the Democrats can provide this coalition with what it wants and needs. As we said in the concluding paragraph of our book, today's Americans want government to play an active and responsible role in American life, guaranteeing a reasonable level of economic security to Americans rather than leaving them at the mercy of the market and the business cycle. They want to preserve and strengthen Social Security and Medicare rather than privatize them. They want to modernize and upgrade public education, not abandon it. They want to exploit new biotechnologies and computer technologies in order to improve the quality of life. They do not want science held hostage to a religious or ideological agenda, and they want the social gains of the 60s consolidated, not rolled back, the wounds of race healed, not inflamed. If the Democrats can do all that, The emerging Democratic majority could be here to stay. Well, clearly, Democrats failed miserably because in 2016, just 4 years later, we got...
You know what I like about this? Number one, I'm in love, and you're in love. We're all in love together. We've done something that nobody's ever done.
Oh, yeah. And part of the reason that we all got to feel that sweet, sweet Trump love was that there was a lack of turnout from Latinos for Hillary Clinton. Now, remember what Teixeira and Judas said, that the coalition would hold so long as Democrats delivered to the coalition what it wants and needs. And while immigration is not the sole issue that Latinos care about, it is a sort of a gateway issue. And here's what candidate Obama said about it in 2008.
The American people need us to put an end to the petty partisanship that passes for politics in Washington. And they need us to enact comprehensive immigration reform once and for all. We can't wait 20 years from now to do it. We can't wait 10 years from now to do it. We need to do it by the end of my first term as president of the United States of America.
Now, of course, Barack Obama was president for 8 years and comprehensive immigration reform did not happen. And Univision's Jorge Ramos constantly reminded him of that fact.
But it was a promise, Mr. President. I am going to switch to English because this is very important. I don't want it to get lost in translation.
Right.
You promised that.
Right.
And a promise is a promise. And with all due respect, but you didn't keep that promise.
Well,
in fact, in 2004, George W. Bush ran his re-election campaign promising to pass comprehensive immigration reform, and he got a staggering 40% of the Latino vote, the highest ever for a Republican. Think about how much times have changed. But of course, deportations have been a fully bipartisan affair. In fact, it was Rahm Emanuel who was the architect of mass deportation when he was an advisor to Bill Clinton in the 90s. In the wake of NAFTA, which destroyed the livelihood of small farms in Mexico, millions of Mexicans were forced off the land. And the U.S. planners understood this and foresaw a wave of immigrants coming across the border. And in a 1996 memo written by Rahm to Slick Willie, Emanuel advised Clinton, then starting his second term, to add more immigration hearings across 6 states, Illinois included, so that he could, quote, claim and achieve record deportations of criminal aliens. George W. Bush then ramped up deportations in the xenophobic climate post 9/11, while Barack Obama cranked them up to hitherto unseen heights, earning the ignominious moniker of deporter-in-chief after kicking out some 2.5 million people, more than any president in American history. Now, of course, the political system has also failed to deliver the goods to Latinos economically. And in fact, the bipartisan free trade agreements like NAFTA have devastated the Latino community. According to a report by the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement, NAFTA's U.S. economic damage has been greatest in regions where the Latino population is concentrated. The 15 states where 85% of Latinos reside account for nearly half of the more than 950,000 NAFTA job losses certified under the TAA program. As NAFTA eliminated U.S. manufacturing jobs, the related wage stagnation for workers without college educations across all industries hit Latinos asymmetrically. Rather than the Latino-white pay gap closing, it increased during the NAFTA years. So you can't really blame Latinos for not really trusting the Democratic Party. But there was one guy they did trust. I'm trying to remember his name.
Es un hombre con muchas visiones para mejorar a este país, corriendo para ser presidente, pero los ricos no lo quieren aquí. Bernie Sanders se llama el compa, su quemazón ahora van a sentir.
Bernie Sanders se llama el compa. Hell yeah. Latinos absolutely loved Tío Bernie. In 2016, Bernie actually lost the Latino vote to Hillary Clinton, but by 2020, the nation's fastest growing demographic was on board with democratic socialism. As Matt Karp wrote in Jacobin, quote, a serious class analysis of the evolving Sanders coalition must also take note of the massive group Bernie brought into the fold this year, Latino voters, the fastest growing portion of America's working class electorate. All over the greater Southwest, from the Rio Grande in Texas to California's Central Valley, Sanders dominated the Latino districts that he had mostly lost to Hillary Clinton in 2016. In heavily Latino neighborhoods from East Los Angeles to Northside Houston, Tío Bernie, often won more votes than Biden, Bloomberg, and Warren combined. This was not a regional phenomenon, nor was it limited to Mexican-American areas. Sanders also won big with working-class Puerto Rican and Dominican-American voters in Holyoke and Lawrence, Massachusetts, as well as in Central American immigrant neighborhoods in Central LA and Southwest Houston. In nearly all these places, Sanders had to overcome the opposition of the Latino political class, which was scarcely more favorable to him than the black political establishment. By early March, Sanders had received just 2 endorsements from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Biden had 14. Yet there is no such thing as a Latino Obama, and the institutional ties linking Latino voters to the Democratic establishment, we learned this year, may be relatively weak. In the end, few Latino leaders delivered their constituents to Biden across 4 Southern California congressional districts represented by Lucille Roybal Ayard, Lou Correa, Tony Cardenas, and Juan Vargas. Biden endorses all. Sanders beat his multiple rivals with an outright majority of votes. So, if you look at it, Trump is doing surprisingly well with Latinos. Bernie did really well with Latinos. They seem to be disillusioned with the Democratic establishment. It seems like organizing and radicalizing the gettable Latino vote should be the top priority of the left. In his postmortem on the Bernie campaign for Jacobin, Conor Kilpatrick made this exact point. Instead of waiting around for the squad to take the lead, we should take a closer look at where Sanders reigned strongest this time and start turning those votes into political power. And the first step should be organizing the Latino-dominated communities in the West who went wild for the Democratic Socialist. In a 7-way race, Sanders won nearly 40% of LA County voters, over 50% in some congressional district, yet there are no outspoken Bernie-crat officials representing them. Why the hell not? If we can get a Sanders elected to the Senate in Vermont, what about New Mexico or Colorado or Hawaii? Why isn't the House of Representatives teeming with Bernie-crat congressmen from the West and Southwest? Imagine that. It could happen. It's up to us. If not, we risk losing these voters to the Trumpist right. The Democrats have failed them, but the socialism can win them over. Working-class Latinos could be the key to countering the weight of the newest and hottest demographic in the Democratic Party coalition, rich suburban whites who will never be on board with even mild redistributive policies.
Yeah, I love that. Some of the numbers were pretty surprising to me, especially because we're so inundated with media constantly telling us that the number one issue for everyone in this country is identity-related stuff. Mm-hmm. And while I don't doubt that a portion of that is important to some voters, what impacts their lives every single day? It's their material conditions, Mm-hmm. And so you have Bernie Sanders come in and encourage and fire up people who had no interest in voting in the first place, by the way, had completely abandoned electoral politics because they feel like it hasn't in any way improved their lives. And he fires them up. They show up in Nevada in record numbers to vote for him in the Democratic primary. But the narrative that we kept hearing over and over and over again in election coverage was that the most electable candidate in this field is going to be Joe Biden. And so he's, I think, unsuccessfully, in a lot of ways, trying to straddle this line between appealing to the wealthy white voters who they care about their tax cuts. They're going to go with Trump. They don't care about anything else. Okay. I've seen it I've seen it play out. And then also pretending like he's a better candidate for minorities in the country when, you look at the last few decades and the evidence just doesn't bear that out. Then, of course, he has his slip-ups where he says, you're not black if you don't vote for me. That kind of stuff doesn't play well with people, right? So if someone comes to me and says, you're not Armenian unless you do X, Y, and Z, that's insanely insulting and offensive. And so when you hinge a lot of your politics on identity and then you don't deliver, there are consequences not only for your own election, but for elections to come, right? And the narrative of Biden being more electable, there was no evidence of that. It was just a line that everyone seemed to use in corporate media without providing any evidence of it, and then they would move forward. And one other thing about corporate media, the disdain toward working Americans is real. I was just listening to an interview with Adolph Reed on Useful Idiots. And by the way, we're going to interview Adolph Reed on the show today as well. And they brought up the fact that Joyanne Reed in response to Bernie's policy of free public college, said that these are like people who show up to your house and they like crash on your couch. Like they're bums, they're losers, like people who want free college. The disdain is real. It's there, and you can see it in the corporate media that tends to back corporate Democrats. You can see it in the platform of the DNC, which is why, while I do think it's important to get Trump out of office, I also think it's important to be real about what a Biden presidency really means. And I see it as an opportunity. I really think that the left has an opportunity here to compete with the right wing on providing a much better alternative to what we're going to experience during Biden's presidency if he gets elected.
And with Latino voters, I mean, this is something that you know well, is that we watch politicians like bend over backwards for Cuban American voters in Florida. There's 900,000 Cuban American voters in Florida. There's something like 800,000 Puerto Rican American voters in Florida, but overall in the Latino vote, there's 70% of them are Mexican Americans. Like, some Mexican Americans dominate the sort of voting bloc broadly understood as the Latino vote. And if Biden comes in and continues with the deportations, right? I mean, it's just gonna, like, with Mexican Americans, like, think about the numbers. 2.5 million people deported under Obama, and there was like between 11 and 15 million undocumented people in this country. I mean, just by sheer numbers, like, these people have like social links, like they have friends and they have aunts and uncles and cousins or whatever. Like, people personally know a lot of people who have been deported in the Latino community. So think about how traumatic that is, to be deported from your country, like from the country that you're living in. Like, you just get forcibly removed. Like, it's a pretty traumatic thing. And for Obama, like, constantly use the excuse that, like, oh, the Republicans in Congress, the Republicans in Congress, the Republicans in Congress. You could, as president, you have pretty broad authority to slow that down, to minimize it as much as you can. There's no like law that you need to pass. It's not like the federal agencies are just, doing stuff on their own. If the president were to intervene, they could stop the deportations pretty dramatically. They have broad latitude to do it. And it's such a disastrous thing, and it creates so much cynicism amongst Mexican Americans, especially, and Central Americans, that if Biden does that again, if he ramps them up again, like, you could lose a lot of these people to the right wing. I mean, they're going to be like, okay, well, both these parties, like, it's the same. It's that cynicism is like Tinder for the right. That's what they feed on. Like, they'd rather than have like the strong asshole rather than the meek Democrat. So it's going to be such a key thing, and like, no one talks about it. Like, immigration has been completely off of this campaign trail, probably for the best. I mean, I don't think it's like a great issue for liberals or like, it's just the Trump the right wing is just very much like, has like it's more fertile ground for them. Like, no one really, outside of like people who are immediately impacted, no one really cares about it on the sort of
let me jump in about it. I actually think people do care about it quite a bit in today's political climate. And the reason why I think that is because Trump relied on his anti-immigration message to basically get people to vote for him, right? To get the support that he had in 2016. And people like to automatically assume that it's because we live in a deeply racist country. And to be sure, we do have racial issues in this country. There's no question. However, we also have to look at people's material conditions, right? And so there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration about the economic situation that the majority of Americans are living under right now. And it creates an environment that's easy to exploit for divide and conquer strategies. So, I agree with you. I'm glad that topic wasn't like front and center with this election, because to be quite honest with you, especially during the pandemic, when so many Americans are feeling the financial pressure and the lack of help from the federal government, it would have been so easy for Trump to come in and say, oh, you're experiencing this because these people are taking your jobs. These people are causing harm in your communities. It's just easier for the right wing to message that. And Democrats haven't been able, because they haven't really address the material conditions of Americans. They haven't been able to have a competing message or a counterpoint to that. And one other thing, I'm curious, because whenever I see Democratic candidates make all these mistakes in their campaigning, I think about the mindset of the failure strategists that they're paying an insane amount of money to give them advice for. So do you think that this necessity to appeal to Cuban voters in Florida, who overwhelmingly are Republican, do you think that comes from this need to just increase the chances of winning that state because of the Electoral College? Because in California, I mean, there's a huge Mexican population in California, of course, and California is always going to vote blue. So do you think that's why Biden has decided to focus on Cuban voters who are just not going to, I don't think they're going to vote for him?
No, I mean, well, you can make the same. I mean, obviously, there's a ton of Mexicans in California, but there's tons of Mexicans in Texas. You know, if like the Democratic, if there was an effective organizing effort in Texas to organize the millions and millions of Mexican Americans who live there, imagine if the Democrats were able to flip Texas for good. Like, they would never lose an election. Like that's game over. You know what I mean? But there is the obsessive focus on Florida because it's seen as a traditional swing state, and because Cuban American voters are much more well organized. I mean, they have those political links to power centers in Washington. I mean, the history of it is we all know. It's like just because they're very serviceable for U.S. empire interests and stuff, whereas Mexican Americans are useless in terms of U.S. empire. So, but those links are real and those power centers are real. There are powerful Cuban Americans in Washington. There are not many powerful Mexican Americans in Washington, even though Mexican Americans dwarf the Cuban population, like absolutely dwarf them in states that matter in elections. I mean, yes, California doesn't matter for the Democrats, but the Arizona matters, New Mexico matters, Nevada matters, and Texas could matter. There are tons of unregistered Latino voters in Texas, but there is just no effort to organize those people. There's just zero. They're just completely invisible from the conversation. Bernie actually attempted, with a very concerted effort, to actually make meaningful ties with these communities. I mean, he didn't do the Warren Julian Castro thing, in which it was all just superficial bullshit about well, we stay Latinx here, and stuff. And it's like, they don't give a shit about that, they give a shit about, are you going to stop deporting people that I know? Are you going to deliver healthcare to me? Are you going to make my economic life more secure? Those bread and butter issues. Again, it's not rocket science. It's not some consultant trick about, saying the right words or playing the right song in the thing. It's again, politics is much more simple, bread and butter issues that affect people's daily lives, and you can win them, but there is no effort to organize those people. Instead, there's this kind of inertia around the conventional wisdom that you have to, try to outflank the Republicans on the right on issues like Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro to win Latino voters in Florida. Even though Barack Obama won Florida handily 2 times, while not really pandering to that idea, right? Those lessons were not learned. Obama ran on rapprochement with Cuba. He did not run on this furious frothing at the mouth, we got to murder all people in the Castro regime, which is what Biden is really trying to do. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little, but he has been tweeting constantly about the evils of Venezuelan socialism and Cuba and stuff like that. He's trying to outflank Trump on the right in this issue, and these Lincoln Project guys who are dominant within the Biden campaign are making the point that Trump is more like Castro. They're trying to link Trump to Castro.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
But again, it's not going to work. They're never going to see the Cuban Americans in Miami who care about that stuff. And that's a specific cohort that they're trying to win over. Will always see the Republicans as more reliable anti-communists for a million reasons, from the fact that Kennedy abandoned them in the Bay of Pigs, to Janet Reno and Bill Clinton sending Elion back home in the late 90s. For a million reasons, they're going to see the Republicans as more reliable anti-communists. It's never going to work. You're never going to outflank them on that issue. So just stop. Just stop trying. Obama stopped trying, and he won. Oh.
Yeah, and you're right. The most frustrating part about electoral politics is how simple it can be to win.
Yeah.
Right. And all you have to focus on, I mean, you'll see it in my decode segment. People are very clear about what they need and how they've given up on politics because they don't think either party is going to give them what they need to just live a better life in the richest country in the world. But I think that, look, neoliberalism is the Democratic Party's ideology. It just is. And so when we say that they're not learning lessons, it's because they don't want to. Learning that lesson would conflict with their deeply held beliefs and values. And so that's why they don't focus on wages. They pretend to, you'll get a little bit of, surface level BS about how they're going to improve people's wages. But just think about how that conversation went down in 2016. I mean, you have Bernie Sanders in the primary saying, no, you need $15 minimum wage. And then you have Hillary Clinton, right, who I think symbolizes neoliberalism perfectly in this country, saying let's nickel and dime. Let's nickel and dime the American people who have increased their productivity, who work incredibly hard, who literally make these whole multinational corporations run. Okay, let's nickel and dime them $12 an hour. Well, that's not a popular message. It's just not. And honestly, right now, if you run the numbers, $15 an hour, not enough, not a living wage in many parts of this country. So I think even us on the left need to be real about that and demand more than $15 an hour. But anyway, so I love that segment. And there was one other thing I wanted to mention. I love that you mentioned George McGovern's revenge.
Yeah.
That's
professional whites, college-educated whites with minorities. That's what the Democrats have been trying to build instead of just building a working-class multiracial coalition, which would be the only way to deliver those goods that Rui Teixeira and John Judas talk about. You cannot deliver those goods if you're mixing the coalition with these kind of rich suburban professionals. Like, they're just not going to be on board with redistributive policies. And if that's the power center, it's just never going to happen. You need to build a working class coalition. That's the only way it's ever happened in the history of politics, in the history of the world. It's not rocket science.
You see it playing out on a hyper local level as well. I mean, in Los Angeles with, the whole not in my backyard culture. When it comes to building affordable housing in certain neighborhoods. I mean, people get fired up. You'll see, the PMC showing up to the streets to protest immediately as soon as there's some sort of proposal to build a shelter or affordable housing in, a moderately wealthy neighborhood.
Did you see, you mentioned Los Angeles and this kind of type of politics. Eric Garcetti yesterday rolled out a policy, and here's his tweet about his new policy.
Don't get me started.
It goes, this is an actual tweet from Eric Garcetti, mayor of LA. We're delivering assistance to Angelenos facing economic hardship during the COVID-19 pandemic. Starting on Monday, with our new Early Pay LA program, LA.official will offer $20 discount on parking citations paid within 24 hours.
Oh my God. Eric Garcetti. I hate Eric Garcetti gets under my skin probably more than any politician in the country right now.
Yeah.
He is feckless.
Can you believe that?
Ineffective. He is a product of nepotism. The city of LA is a disaster right now. The county of LA is a disaster. You have entire homeless encampments on the freeway right now, okay? Like on the side of the freeway. How is this? What is happening? No, I think
$20 discount on parking tickets paid within 48 hours. That'll really fix it. That'll really solve it.
I can't stand him. And then you have Biden possibly thinking about appointing him as the transportation secretary so he can oversee infrastructure projects. Eric Garcetti has failed infrastructure projects in Los Angeles. We have paid more in taxes. Like, overwhelmingly, Angelenos agreed to paying more in taxes to build affordable housing. And what did he do? Where's the affordable housing construction? I've seen a lot of construction when it comes to condominiums. I've seen a lot of construction from disgusting corporate real estate developers who build luxury apartments that literally sit empty. What is Garcetti doing? Garcetti is trash. I can't stand him. Anyway,
all right.
You hit a nerve there.
Yeah, I know.
All right.
All right.
All right,
You
so-
do you. Let out that energy
I'm
in your
gonna-
decode segment.
Oh, I'm ready.